Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Welcome to Leadership in the Age of Climate Change, a conversation with Rose Marcario, presented by the Conference on World Affairs in partnership with the Center for Leadership. My name is Karen Mikva, and I'm a student in the CU Boulder Masters of the Environment program, specializing in sustainability in the outdoor industry. I would like to open our program this evening with CU Boulder's land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous people in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on Indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge, and by consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support, and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. Thank you. I'm excited to introduce our host for this evening, Chancellor Phil DiStefano. Nobody knows CU Boulder quite like Chancellor DiStefano. During his tenure at the university, he has contributed his expertise and knowledge as an educator, dean, provost, and chancellor. And he has seen it from the perspective of a parent and donor as well. A first-generation college student, DiStefano began his career as an assistant professor in the School of Education. He currently serves as the Quigg and Virginia S. Newton Endowed Chair in Leadership, overseeing CU Boulder's prestigious leadership programs. DiStefano has been a longtime leader on this campus and in the Boulder community, and through his leadership, he continues to make CU Boulder a nationally recognized research institution that shapes tomorrow's leaders and has a positive impact on humanity. It is now my honor to introduce our esteemed guest for the evening, Rose Marcario. Rose is the former CEO and president of Patagonia Incorporated, one of the most admired companies in America. In her 12-year tenure, under her leadership, she deepened Patagonia's commitment to advocacy, environmental activism, and responsible business. She grew the company to over $1 billion in sales and quadrupled profit by expanding Patagonia's direct-to-consumer business and international footprint. She created the company's first in-house venture fund, oversaw the development and creation of Patagonia Provisions, an organic regenerative food company, and developed Patagonia Action Works, an online platform that connects customers with environmental causes. She has been recognized for her work as a champion of the benefit corporation movement. Rose's current body of work includes roles with Rivian, an electric adventure vehicle company, serving as the chair of ForeverX Rivian Foundation and on their corporate board as chair of their Planet and Policy Committee. She's also a founding partner at Regen Ventures, helping to fund early-stage regenerative companies, and is a visiting fellow with Oxford University's Said School of Business, focusing on enacting purpose in the corporate boardroom. Rose sits on the board of environmental impact companies, including Meeting Foods here in Boulder, and is a member of the founding board of SPUN, the Society to Protect Underground Networks. Welcome, Rose Marcario and Chancellor DiStefano.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that warm introduction. That was great.
That was lovely.
I appreciate it.
Hello,
Well,
Boulder.
Yes. Good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with Rose. And Rose, let's just start and give you a little bit of background about the conference and what we did in December with our Sustainability Summit with the United Nations. And we very much appreciate you joining us. In December of 2022, CU Boulder was proud to co-host the Right Here, Right Now Global Climate Summit with United Nations Human Rights. The three-day conference drew more than 4,000 registrants from 99 countries, both in person and online, to discuss climate solutions that support the fundamental rights and basic dignity of human beings. And we're tremendously grateful to continue that conversation this spring at the 75th Conference on World Affairs, and tonight, of course, with you. And your perspectives on the role of businesses and individuals in addressing climate and environmental priorities are most welcome. And we have a variety of questions prepared for you, many of which were submitted by our students. So we'll jump right into it. So the first question, Patagonia has been a hopeful example of how large-scale companies can integrate environmental sustainability and ethical practices in their business model. And after your departure in September of 2022, the company made headlines when the founder, Ivan Shadnar, and his family announced that they would give away the $3 billion company to a trust and nonprofit organization. And a student from our president's leadership class, Jordan Lee, wants to know, how do you think other companies or businesses can be persuaded to make similar changes? What can we do as consumers, or can the general public do anything to advocate for these changes?
Chancellor, thank you for having me here at CU Boulder. It's fantastic to be here, and it's great to be talking about these issues. Well, I would say this about that question, that there are a lot of companies right now that are focused on climate solutions, and they're working on solutions to change our transportation systems, to change our energy systems, to create a just and equitable transition for the world to move toward a livable future. I mean, we all have seen that IPCC climate report, and it's worse than we imagined that it could be. The damage that climate change is doing is accelerating. So what's good news is that there are a lot of companies working on this. The other good news is that there are founders and CEOs now that are inspired by companies like Patagonia that are creating foundations at the point of their initial public offerings. And Melanie Perkins at Canva is a really good example. She took 30% of her equity, that was valued at $16 billion, and she put it in a foundation. And she did that at the time of IPO. RJ at Rivian took 8 million shares of his IPO. It was the largest IPO in history last year, and put it into a foundation for nature and biodiversity. So I think we're seeing this sea change where CEOs and founders are starting to realize that we're in such dire straits that at this moment when a company makes a significant amount of money and raises a significant amount of money to have its trajectory, that's also a moment for philanthropy and to look at how they can make real change in society. So I think that's a really positive thing. If we stopped right now, all innovation, we already have all of the tools and all of the technologies to curb the climate crisis. What we don't have is investment, right? Most of that investment is coming from the private markets. We still have our governments subsidizing entrenched status quo fossil fuel legacy companies. $20 billion in subsidies for fossil fuel, oil, and coal last year. I mean, these are already rich companies, you know, and we're subsidizing them, and we should be subsidizing the transition. So I think that's the way I look at the sort of the landscape of companies and some of the governmental challenges. What you can do personally, which is a question that, you know, I get a lot. It's why when I was at Patagonia, I set up Patagonia Action Works so that our customers could see who we were giving our foundation money to. And they could get to know the friends groups and the environmental groups that were focused on making real change. So that's one thing that you can do. I think you have to look at your sphere of influence. You know, is your sphere of influence your class, your workplace, your home, your friends, your family? Okay, if that's your sphere of influence, then how can you make change there? And the most important thing you can do is be a citizen. Vote, advocate. Understand what are the real issues in your neighborhood, you know, water, soil, air, you know, look for those groups that are working on advocacy and restoration and repair of those things. So I think that's one of the things you can do. If you're interviewing for a job, you can say to the interviewer, what are your sustainability goals for the company? Right. Is your management incentivized on sustainability goals? Now, you might not get hired because they might not like your questions. They might not like your questions, but
it tells you something.
It tells you something, right? And you probably don't want to work for that company if you care about these issues, right? So, those are some things that you can do. But I would say look at your sphere of influence and then look at where you can get involved, you know? And I think people make the mistake of thinking, oh, I'm just going to make a little bit of a difference. Right. But that's not true, you know? If you think about what really creates tectonic shifts, what really changes things, right? It's like this current of, they actually call it that, right? They call it the convection current, I think, the thing that knocks the tectonic plates, you know, askew. It's like, if we all sort of do whatever part we can do, we can make these big tectonic shifts. We can create a livable future.
Right. That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. So a second question from one of our students, Camden Opfer. And Camden is also a student in our President's Leadership class. And he offered this question. What strategies can consumers use to distinguish greenwashing from real sustainable impact?
Right. Well, I think the first thing is sort of the product, right? Is the product good for the world? Is it positive? Does it have a positive impact? I think the other things that are very tangible that you can look at to distinguish whether someone's greenwashing is you can look at their sustainability report. You can see how transparent they are in their disclosures. Hopefully they'll discuss their supply chain. I think if a company doesn't discuss the complexity of their supply chain, then the company is not really serious about sustainability, because your supply chain is everything. You know, it's where everything happens. And there's this thing when you read sustainability reports, it's scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Scope 1 is like the direct energy you use, solar panels and stuff like that. Scope 2 is who you get your energy from. Are you getting it from wind or oil or whatever? Scope 3 is your entire value chain. It's your supply chain. So if a company is like, scope 3, we're working on it, and they make no commitments, well, that's the biggest part of the supply chain. So that's a really important thing. I think the other thing is circularity, which is probably the most important thing that we'll see in the next decade, which is taking responsibility for your products from end to end, from design, from development, designing for repair, designing for recycling, and end use responsibility. We wouldn't be in the problem that we're in with plastics, right? If all of those companies would have had circularity built into their system, right? Because they would have figured it out, how to deal with it, or that it was not the best material. So I think there are things that you can do. You can also look at philanthropy, which I think is really important. I think if a business is making billions of dollars, but they're doing zero philanthropy, I don't know. You have to wonder about that.
Exactly.
Or they're doing really minimal philanthropy, right? Some of them do that. And then you have to look at advocacy, because what are they advocating for? You know, are they advocating for policy that's good for people in the planet, or are they advocating for themselves? Or for a price reduction and a, customs issue? You know, a lot of what companies do, they do behind closed doors. Patagonia wasn't one of those companies. We tried to let people know what we were advocating for. But you can see that tells you a lot about a company, its leadership and its management.
That transparency piece is so important when it comes to it.
It really is, because I'm really happy, like the NASDAQ has these new rules now around reporting the gender of your board and all of that kind of stuff. I think that's really, really healthy, right? It just makes everything much more tangible and easier for people to access.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. So Cecily Coors wants to know, can you tell us about your experiences as a venture partner with Regen Ventures? And what do you consider when investing in new companies that are profitable, sustainable, and a force for good?
Well, I think that innovation is the most exciting part of capitalism. And I feel like there hasn't been enough innovation, especially around climate and issues like that, over the last 20 years. And part of that is because it's been kind of suppressed, I think, by the entrenched status quo that doesn't want the innovation and doesn't want to invest in it. But the idea behind the firm, or the thesis behind the firm, is really that you can't incrementally fix what's fundamentally broken. So the companies that we look at are really companies that have technology and ability to scale, because we can't just have a small little corner case of something that's doing well. It has to have the impact to scale. It has to be restorative and regenerative to the planet.
Okay.
And of course, it has to have an amazing founder. And it's a global firm, so we get to see technologies and companies from all over the world. But it's really exciting, because in some ways, I feel like the U.S. kind of abandoned some of its technology innovation. The image is kind of burnt into my mind, and a lot of you might be too young to remember this. But it's Carter putting the solar panels on the White House and Reagan taking them off. I mean, think of where we would be, right? And that was a long time ago. And what did we do? We ceded that to China. Now China, makes a huge portion of the world's solar panels. Well, that was innovation. Right. And Carter was actually really interested in innovation. But that kind of innovation is what we need right now. And then we need the investment in it. So that's why we wanted to start a fund, and we also wanted to share values with these founders and kind of inculcate early on that values and purpose is an important part of running a company and having a company in this new world. I mean, when we think about like the iconic companies that we grew up with, Philip Morris, right. Lung cancer, Coca-Cola, diabetes, obesity, diabetes, I mean, they're not companies that when Monsanto, these are the sort of the iconic companies we grew. Those cannot be the names in the next, 10, 20 years, or we won't be here, So I think the next iconic companies will be those that really tackle this question of restoring and regenerating the planet and helping to save us from this this situation that we're in right now with climate, this kind of dire planetary situation.
Well, when you talk about, regen, I also think about on the medical side, regeneration of tissue. I mean, that is, an area now of such importance. Here at our university, we're a leader in that, and it fits the business model as well.
Right.
But it's personal, it's as we grow older, that's what we look for.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I love that title. I love that title for that. Another one of our students, Daniel Howard, noted that tech workers in government tend to have greater job security compared to the private companies like Meta, Twitter, and Amazon, which have all experienced recent layoffs. He wants to know, regardless of industry, how should leadership be incorporating long-term cost into their operations to prevent massive layoffs?
Well, I think the answer is kind of in the question in a way. Yes. That, of course, you have to incorporate a more long-term vision of companies. I think in the case of those kind of behemoth companies, right, there's probably a different story for each of those companies, although trillions of dollars of wealth was created for billionaires during the COVID crisis, and then there was a significant sort of drop off on consumption, right, because of inflation and stuff like that. I mean, there'll always be cycles in capitalism. There'll always be downturns, but the magnitude of the cycle, the magnitude of the downturn, I believe is really driven by the fact that we have this very inequitable and becoming more inequitable society where you have like a few billionaires controlling a massive amount of assets, and you have a tax system. If Elon Musk is paying a 1% to 3%, effective tax rate, and you're having 40% taken out of your check, right, your paycheck, that's a broken system, and there seemed to be no end to the tax breaks for billionaires, and I think that has something to do with why the cycles are so stark and why the cycles are so punishing. But all of those companies are complex, they're big, they're in some ways they're monopolies too, right? So they're sort of unregulated monopolies. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, I think that's all of those things contribute. Right. Yeah.
So we're going to switch gears a bit and talk about questions of leadership, if that's okay. And here on campus, the CU Boulder Center for Leadership, which helped to organize tonight's event, was formed in 2020. to unify more than 30 independent leadership programs across the campus. And the center believes that leadership exists within all of us and seeks to prepare leaders of character who will positively impact humanity. And one of the ways that the center does that is through this Leo Hill Leadership Speaker Series, which invites leaders from all walks of life to share their perspectives with the university community. So the first question, of course, is, a general one: how do you define leadership?
Okay. I define leadership, and this may sound revolutionary, but I'm going to say it. I define leadership as love. Love that creates outcomes of purpose. When I say love, I mean you can't get incredible results without creating this feeling of love and excitement for an aspirational vision of our future. If you're going to a certain place and you need a team of people to do it and get it done, they all have to be in love with that vision. And I think it's a leader's responsibility to create that vision, to share that vision, to motivate against that vision when times are rough and you're feeling beat up. And, so I think it's love. Now, I want to say this, but I grew up with a totally different example of leadership. Like, completely different. Like, I've been working since I was 15. We were talking about our immigrant family backstage. I've been working since I was 15. I've never once had a boss who didn't have this, some versions were better, some were worse, of this command and control and kind of militaristic or paramilitaristic view of how to manage. I don't blame them. They kind of probably grew up with that. All of my bosses have been men.
Right.
So that from a point of curiosity, I would watch that and think, oh, I don't want to do that. Like, when I lead, I don't want to lead that way. So the closest approximation to the way I feel like leadership works in a way that's really multiplying, because love multiplies, right? If you're feeling love and you're feeling excitement about something, it multiplies, right? Fear contracts and control contracts you. It makes you not want to be involved. So, yeah, I think that's a long answer to what should be a short question.
No, that's a great answer. I mean, I talk a lot about leadership from the standpoint of leaders and humility. I mean, I think some of our best leaders are very humble individuals, and they're, and it's that empathetic leader that I believe gets more done than not. And, that the EQ pieces we've not talked about in leadership for a long time.
Yeah.
It's always been the, more of the who's the leader, who's, my way or the highway kind of thing. So I like that. I like the love piece. It fits. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Under your leadership, Patagonia took several really bold actions at the intersection of business, environment, and politics. And the company has a long history of activism and made waves when it sued President Trump over his plans to shrink Bears Ears National Monument in Utah. And what lessons have you learned about getting involved in politics and democracy from a business lens?
Okay, so for all businesses are involved in politics. Like, it's a total misnomer to say business isn't involved in politics. Lobbying, I think lobbying last year was close to $3 trillion paid by lobbyists. This is just federal. This is not state. So federal lobbyists. That doesn't include the stuff that's not counted. That doesn't include the mega yacht trips. That doesn't include, the remodeling of your mother's home. I mean, it doesn't include a lot. So let's say it's really double that. That's a lot of money that companies pay to have influence. And when you cone it down, it's actually a relatively small group of people. When Trump extinguished Bear's ears with a pen stroke, he actually reduced 3 national monuments by 3 different presidents. He reduced them by over 3 million acres. So that's a landmass the size of Wyoming. And Patagonia and its founders had spent, a lifetime working on issues of conservation and felt very strongly about those issues and wanted to act. And it's the only difference is that we acted, we told our customers about it. We told our customers about our advocacy. And I remember I was sitting in my office and I was talking to our creative director and I said, I'm so pissed off about this. I just want to black out our website and tell everyone about it. And it was like, I don't know, maybe 2 hours later, he sent over the blackout of the website that said the president stole your land, with a whole discussion about why we were suing the president. Now, at the time, it was kind of a scary thing to do.
Sure.
I was not worried about myself, although I received my fair share of threats and stuff after we did it. I was more worried about our employees in our stores, because I didn't want them to get hurt or in the middle of a political fight. But we'd worked in conservation, for years, and it was always very bipartisan. Some of the best conservation initiatives, in fact, most of the best ones were all bipartisan. But it was really under attack, and so that's why we chose to do it the way that we did it. But I think advocacy is important. Advocacy is just saying, this is what I believe. This is what I believe in. This is what the company believes in. And I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. What's wrong, or what most companies hide behind, is like what they believe is not so good. They might believe in your destruction. They might believe in your food supply being destroyed by pesticides. So I think advocacy is going to become the new norm, I think. Like this public advocacy. And when we did that with Trump, we were attacked by the House Natural Resource Committee. I mean, we were attacked by the government, but the government is attacking U.S. companies all the time now. One way or the other, whether it's governors getting mad at Disney or whether it's whatever. I mean, it's happening all the time. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's the new normal. I think every responsible CEO needs to think about what they stand for and what the company stands for and be willing to advocate for it and not be a weenie, and just sit back and do nothing when the world's on fire.
Well, when you put values at the top, I mean, I think that's another way of saying it. And the values of Patagonia and demonstrating those values through that action.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, let's take another one from a student. As a woman and as part of the LGBTQ community, what challenges have you faced in leadership? And what steps do you believe businesses and organizations must take to make meaningful improvement in the diversity and equity of our businesses, our educational systems, and our communities?
As a woman and as a part of the LGBT community, what challenges haven't I faced, Chancellor? I don't have the answer to those questions. Those are really deep questions that are fundamentally institutional kind of questions. But I do think that being a woman it's like that was hard, right? For all those same reasons. My bosses, everyone around me was, a man, basically. If you got into any level of, and I know I'm dating. It's dated a little bit. Like the world has changed. I appreciate that. Maybe, I don't know. But in some ways, being a woman worked for me. Like I was when I was in a room negotiating, or in a situation where I had to do a negotiation, I was like a raccoon in a room full of dogs. I was like this thing they weren't used to being in there. Like, why is she in there? And what's she gonna do? And this woman's a wild card, And so in some ways, it's like, it worked for me in some ways,
Sure.
I don't know if it kept me from getting promoted and stuff, because you don't never know that, right? You don't ever really know that in your career. Being a lesbian, I don't know. It's not something that people see or notice if they're not looking for it, or if they don't, they don't have affiliation, So that's a bit different. And, I hid my sexuality because it wasn't welcome in the workplace,
Right.
And then I got to a point where I couldn't do that anymore. And I was like, okay, I'm not doing that anymore, no matter what happens. If it blows up my career, my life, I don't care. I'm not going to do that. But the bigger question that's being asked there is really more about, I think, sharing power. And I think that when you look at, most of the CEOs are men, and most of the not to diss on white men,
Right.
but I feel a little awkward.
Right. That's fine.
But I don't think they're good at sharing power,
Right.
And I think they're definitely not good at sharing power. That's been my experience.
Yes. No.
And so I think that has to change, or we have to change it, I think it's sad that I worked, more than 40 years in my life, and I never had a woman boss, ever.
Right.
I never had a person of color as a boss. I never had an LGBTQ person as a boss, ever.
Right.
And you feel a lot of responsibility when you are one of those things to carry the load, because you have to be an example. And yeah, I look forward to the day when A, I'm not asked that question, and B, it's not an issue. But I don't feel like we're really going in that direction very well.
Right.
Yeah. This transparency is helpful that we talked about.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. We'll see where that goes.
Right. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So Emma Martz is a student in the Masters of the Environment program, and she wants to know, do you think any aspects of your personality contributed to becoming the leader that you are today? If not, what growth mindset techniques have you learned to get you to where you are today? That's kind of an interesting question.
I don't know that I know what growth mindset techniques are, but I don't know. Post-traumatic stress, childhood trauma. Parental divorce, upheaval, I mean, I don't know. I had to fend for myself when I was really, really young, and, my mother was quite ill. She was schizophrenic. She had mental illness, and my father left her. And, I mean, it was awful, and I had to figure out a lot of stuff. And, when you have difficult childhood situations, I think you just become more hypervigilant about your surroundings. You have to become a little bit more aware, and you have to get yourself out of situations that are difficult. So I think that definitely helped. I'm also like a very introverted person, which might be hard to tell during this interview, but I am. And I'm a very curious person, and I think that curiosity is also part of it. I sense that from you too, that you're a very curious person. It's like, I think that's part of leadership. You actually care about diving in and figuring things out and wanting to learn more. I think that's a big part of it. Yeah, I think those are sort of the attributes.
Well, when I talk to students about leadership, I bring up curiosity a lot. And with curiosity, there's also failures. And, our our scientists on campus, our Nobel laureates, they failed so many times in the experiments they were doing and so on, but kept going and finding solutions. And so that curiosity piece and failures, I don't know how those two things played.
Yeah, no, I think that's true because you're always kind of trying to I mean, I did that a lot in my early career. It was like, how does this whole structure work, this whole corporate structure? Where do I play in? How do I,
Right.
and you're always kind of trying to figure it out. And, you're looking at, well, why did that guy get that job and I didn't get that job? And, you're just always sort of curious about the reasons and open to talk about things, and I think that's part of it. I think I also had like a real sense of justice when I was a kid. I just like wanted things to be fair, and I had so many bad leadership examples in my life. There's like, oh, I don't want to be like that leader, and what would be more fair, and what might work better, and when you have a bad boss. You probably don't have a bad boss, but maybe.
No.
But when you have a bad boss, it's a learning opportunity. You can learn a lot from a bad boss. Like, you can learn a lot about what not to do and how to be successful.
Right.
Yeah. I actually attribute my success to all my bad bosses.
I agree. I agree. So usually I don't go off script, but I have to on this one because I get asked all the time, I'm a first-generation college graduate, and, now the chancellor at this wonderful university, what made you go, I'm always asked, what made you go into, getting a PhD, the bachelor's degree and a master's? And it was, I probably had one of the worst professors ever in a class teaching, and I thought, I can do that. I mean, he was so bad that I sat there for a semester and I thought, this guy has a PhD, I can do that.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. Like, awful people are really motivating.
Yeah, we always hear the flip side of, my parents really cared about education, making sure we got a solid education. And, mine was just the opposite. I looked at this person and said, I can do that,
Yeah.
So
I completely relate to that.
Yeah, that's really funny when you say that. And it's that curiosity piece as well. So this is an interesting question from one of our students. It's about ethical temptations. And what ethical temptations are especially daunting for leadership today? And how can today's students best prepare for these? And can you describe an ethical dilemma you faced as a leader and how you approached it?
Well, I think the first way to prepare yourself for ethical dilemmas is to know yourself. Is to do, and I don't say that in a trite way. I say that in a way that, like, really exploring who you are and what you believe, because then when you're faced with an ethical dilemma, you know yourself, and you know how you should respond. And even if the chorus of people around you is telling you something different, you're confident in knowing yourself, you're self-referring, you're not adrift, in the conversation. You know what you believe. Back to what we're talking about being curious, but you're curious and you explore the situation and you figure it out. I mean, I don't feel like I've had that many ethical dilemmas, or been asked to do anything that is, not kosher or something. I will say that during COVID, right before, this was when we knew everybody was locking down and Europe was locking down, and things were starting to. They were keeping that ticker on Johns Hopkins, and you could just see the cases multiplying and stuff. And I was CEO of Patagonia at that time. And it was like March of 2020, and it was before California had issued the lockdown. And I woke up in the morning, and I'm like a super morning person. I love the mornings, and it's my most energetic time. And I walked by my wife, and my wife looked at me and she goes, "What's wrong?" And I said, I just woke up this morning and I thought, I don't want anyone to die on my watch.
Oh.
And I was crying, you know, like it's almost like I was dreaming about it or something. And she just said, you're going to figure it out. And I went to work and I was like, oh God, what do I do with this? You know, because there's this other pressure, and the other pressure is you're running a company. And a lot of people depend on you making money and paying their paycheck, and, you know, so those two things felt very much in conflict to me. And by the time I got to the office, I called my team together, and I chose to be vulnerable instead of to have all the answers. And I just said, you guys, I woke up this morning, and this is what I thought. I don't want anyone to die on our watch. But we still need to keep the company going, and we need to make money, and both of those things could be true at the same time, which was kind of an epiphany to me in that moment. Like, okay. And then my team just got immediately to work. They were like, okay, we got that. We're going to figure that out. And for a short time, we shut down all of our operations. Oh. And then we slowly started to figure out, because we had such little information at the time. I mean, very little, right? We really didn't know what to do and how the virus was transmitted and all that. We wrote a letter to our customers and said, I'm sorry, we're not, you know, it's going to take a while to ship your product and all of that. But we figured it out, you know. We were successful. We made it through. No one died. I don't know. That was like, it was sort of like, it wasn't an ethical dilemma, but it was sort of like it was a tension that was life and death.
Right.
You know, when you're selling outerwear, you don't really think you're going to be making life and death decisions when you go to the office during the day, you know? So, yeah, I mean, that was a pretty big moment.
It seems you really relied on your team to help you figure this out, which is another, in my mind, characteristic of a good leader. Tell me a little bit about your team.
Well, I mean, I think that your team is everything when you're a leader. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's everything. And, you know, you have to cast the right people in the right roles, you know? I used to do summer stock and stuff, so I grew up in the theater. And so it's like casting, you know? You want to make sure you got the right person in the right role, but once they're in that role, it's their role, and you have to trust them. I think that's about smartly distributing power.
Yes.
Yeah. If you're distributing your power and not hoarding and controlling your power, you're distributing your power smartly, then you get really good outcomes, I think.
And you have to let them fail sometimes, or you understand if they do fail.
Yeah,
It's
for
not
sure.
For sure, yeah. That has to work out as well.
Yeah.
So we're winding down here, but I do want to just talk about a couple more questions on leadership. And, you know, one is there anything that we haven't discussed that you thought we might be discussing about your career, about leadership in general, that you think's important to share with our students and guests tonight?
Well, I would say one thing maybe for students, you know, it's a learning journey, you know, every job, every role that you take. But we also are in this really important moment where we're in an environmental catastrophe. We need people that are giving their whole heart and their whole energy to companies that are restoring and regenerating the world and not destroying it. So maybe when you're thinking about where you want to spend your time in the next decade, maybe think about being part of that current, you know, that current that makes the tectonic shift that we need. I think I would say that, you know, consider that where you spend your time is really, it's important. And how you contribute is really important. It doesn't really matter what job it is, but I think it does matter what company, what they're doing, what they believe in.
Right.
And it's good to ask those questions. I always, you know, I always wanted to hire somebody when they were asking me those tough questions, you know, about sustainability, about what we're doing around emissions, about why our packaging was, you know, bad and when we were going to change it and stuff like that. I always like that.
That's great. So, Rose, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us here at the University of Colorado Boulder for the Conference on World Affairs, for the Leo Hill Speaker Series. And it's been wonderful to hear your insights, both professional and personal. And I'm going to ask one final question before we end, and that is, what surprised you most about what it's like to lead and what it takes to lead?
What it's like to lead, I would say, the thing that surprised me most is how much people really watch everything that you do. Like, I just wasn't used to it, and as you can maybe glean, I'm like a sort of informal person. I'm not a very, like, and people really watch you when you're a leader. You know, they watch every single thing that you do. They're always sort of looking to you to kind of give them cues. So I think that was kind of the biggest surprise. Also that you represent something beyond yourself. You know, you're a woman leader, you're an LGBTQ leader, you know, it's like you become these things that, you know, are part of who you are, but they're not everything. And I think, yeah, that's what it's like, what it's been like for me to lead. And what was the second part of that question? Sorry, I got
No,
lost
that's okay.
in that.
No, the second part, what it's like to lead, but also what it takes to lead.
What it takes to lead. I think what it takes to lead is an aspirational vision for the company, for the future. And yeah, that's what I think it takes. It takes with a purpose that's beyond yourself and who you are.
Right.
You know, if you can't present to someone an aspirational vision of the future that wants to get up out of bed every day and go, I want to go do that with you and with all of these people.
Right.
If you can't do that, you probably shouldn't be leading.
Exactly.
You know, it's your responsibility to do that. So I think that's what I've learned, and also that, yeah, the purpose is the most important element of that.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed this time so much.
Yeah, likewise. This has been really wonderful. Thank you, CU Boulder.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor. That was wonderful. This always happens.